Welcome to Testimonies of God. My name is Laura Zaviski, and this is my co-host, Miss Minister Kim Thomas. And we have a wonderful guest from Christian Peacemakers teams, and he has very good testimonies, and you're going to get your fill of good testimonies. And his name is Cliff Kindy. And thank you for coming.
It's good to be with you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Ooh, I'm just looking, this is going to be so exciting. But before you get started, Cliff,
Yes.
Can you share with us your walk with the Lord? No, before you got saved, what was you doing? And then your turning point, and then now that you're walking with the Lord, what is he doing?
Well, I was born when my parents were volunteers in Florida working in a migrant camp. They named me for a friend of theirs, Clifford Nakatagawa, who was in the U.S. concentration camps during the Second World War. So in some ways, that was probably a commissioning for me. And maybe it took some years to understand that. But a story that comes out of Gaza Strip is probably a turning point for me. Shall I tell you that?
Yes, yes.
It's a little long story, but it was 1993. I had been on the steering committee for Christian Peacemaker teams for 4 years already. And Gene, the director of CPT, came to me and said, "Cliff, we think you should be on the team that goes to Gaza Strip." We had been invited by a human rights organization in Gaza to send a team of 5. And I thought about it. 2 young daughters, young teenagers, 13 and 14. It didn't seem responsible for me to be gone at that time. So I said, "Thank you, Gene, but no thank you." And Gene, who's persistent, came back and said, "Cliff, we think you ought to be on this team." So we looked at it again, and our family is our organic market gardeners. We grow and sell fruits and vegetables. And I would be gone during the 3 busiest months, July, August, September. And it just didn't make sense for me to leave Arlene and the girls with that kind of responsibility all by themselves. So I said, "No, Gene, can't do it." Gene persistent. So he comes back again and said, "Cliff, we really think you should be on this team." And at that point, Miriam said, "Daddy," she's our 13-year-old, "Daddy, many fathers and sons leave home in Gaza Strip and never come back, and you're only going to be gone for 3 months. Maybe we should make it possible for you to go." So, of course, Daddy went to Gaza Strip. Wow. We met with Rabbi Jeremy Milgram in Jerusalem as we went in, and Jeremy said, "As you go cross the borders into Gaza, you cross the borders into hell." At that point, the UN said the Gaza Strip was the most densely populated area in the world. Unemployment was about 80% because the borders with Israel had just been closed, so people who had worked in carpentry or agriculture weren't able to do that anymore. No garbage pickup, so the garbage blew and the shepherd boys grazed their flocks on the garbage that blew up into stacks. Sewage, no sewage system, so if you walked the streets, you straddled the sewage ditch. 600 parts per million chloride in the water, public water, 400 parts per million nitrates, and giardia in the public water. Schools, kindergarten through university, had been closed for 4 years. Curfews were each night and sometimes for 2 weeks on end. So here I was, going in. And shortly after we got in, Jihad Islamic wrote a message on the wall that all North Americans should be either kidnapped or killed. Whoa, what does that mean?
The Jihad group wrote this?
Yeah,
Wow.
one of the conservative Muslim groups in Gaza Strip. And so we talked with our hosts and we said, well, what should we do? And finally we made a decision to stay. And it was some weeks later, our human rights hosts were asking us to stay with families in the refugee camps. So each week we'd be in a different camp with a different family. And it was about the 3rd or 4th week we were headed down to Rafah camp on the border with Egypt. And as we came into the camp, there was a checkpoint at the entrance. Israeli soldiers stuck their gun in the taxi, checking out IDs and passports, and waved us on in. And we got into Shabura section of Rafah camp, and there were soldiers on the 2-story buildings where checking the scenes below where the children were playing on the ground, and you could hear gunshots in the distance, and every once in a while a Jeep would up and squeal to a stop, and soldiers would be out with guns at the ready. And we had entered a war zone. That afternoon, our host took us to a family. One of the sons had been wanted by Israelis, and you could be wanted for being the wrong political party or some infraction at a checkpoint. So that afternoon, we were at a funeral. The one son who was wanted was being pursued by Israeli soldiers the day before. His brother stepped in front of the pursuing soldiers, took 7 shots below his waist, and was taken to a nearby hospital in Khan Yunis, because Rafah, with 200,000 population, had no hospital. And he died that day in the hospital as soldiers prevented doctors to enter and assist him. So we were at his funeral the next day. The middle of the afternoon, through my host, who was the translator, the family asked, "Cliff, would you be willing to stay with us tonight? We're afraid that the soldiers may come back." Last night they came, they ransacked the house, shot holes in the only shower in the house, the only sink in the house, holes in the roof, and then left pretty abruptly. And they're afraid they're going to come back. Well, here I am. I'm a farmer from Indiana. We use hoes and shovels and wheelbarrows. We don't have guns in the house. And here my mind was going, okay, Cliff, why are you here? Well, okay, I'll stay. I'll stay with you tonight. Okay, so 9 o'clock, curfew, and we go into the house. Well, I don't speak Arabic. The family didn't speak English, but you begin to exchange names. My name's Cliff, other names in the family, and you begin to learn a few words. But I could sense the tenseness in the air, that everybody was feeling like, oh, yikes, what happens? Is it going to happen all over again? And about midnight, there was a knock on the door. Got more insistent. And the sister, who became kind of the presence of the Spirit for me that night, went and opened the door. 7 Israeli soldiers came in with automatic weapons, with helmets, with flak jackets, clearly in charge of the situation, knowing exactly what was going to happen that night. And then they saw me sitting over against the wall in my pajamas and my sandals, my heart beating in my chest. And they realized I didn't belong in Rafah camp, but they didn't know who I was, so very politely they went through each room of the house. And you could see them trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. So on the way out, they grabbed the 2 older brothers, and the sister made it clear that if anything was going to happen, it was going to be outside, and I better get outside. So I went outside, and there the brothers were being asked to take down the tarp that had shaded the wake area that afternoon, and to take down the pictures of Munir, the young man who had been killed, and to whitewash the walls, because newspapers are allowed to be printed in Gaza Strip, and so the walls become the newspapers. And so the soldiers were asking them to be whitewashed, so they look tidier. Well, the 2 brothers had agreed to take down the tarp that had shaded the wake area, but refused to do the other 2 tasks. And so Ariel, who was the captain of the squad, comes over to me, and I'd earlier tried to talk to them, but I don't speak Hebrew either, and they said they didn't speak English, but now he was speaking English. He said, he drops his gun at my chest and said, "Cliff, why don't you take down the posters?" I realized, okay, if I take down the posters, I might not have a place to stay tonight. And on the other hand, if I don't take down the posters, I might not need a place to stay tonight. And neither sounded very promising. And so I tried reflective listening. I said, "So it's really important, Ariel, for the posters the posters to come down." "Yes, Cliff." "And you'd like me to take them?" "Yes, Cliff, I'd like." But I couldn't remember anything more about reflective listening either. So, but about that time, 4 more soldiers come in off the street, and suddenly nobody can speak English anymore, and everybody has to be more macho than everybody else. And then some of the soldiers are sent to a neighbor's house, and you can again hear the knock on the door, but this time no answer, and the door splinters between under the gun butts, and 5 volunteers are brought out. Well, I was feeling like I was in this room flooded with gasoline, somebody about ready to flick a match or a cigarette into the fuel, and I said, "Ariel, Doesn't have to be like that. Who are you, Cliff? Well, I'm Cliff Kindy. I'm from Indiana. Why are you here? Well, I guess I have the trust that in situations of conflict, we don't have to wait until the bodies get stacked up and the tallest stack wins, that somehow God will intervene in this situation. God will never intervene in this situation, Cliff. I said, well, remember when the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt, who would imagine then that God would have intervened? And yet God did intervene. God will never intervene here, Cliff. And about that time, Ariel starts to back the two brothers up against the wall with his automatic weapon. I can see the match about to hit the fuel. So I slip my body between the gun and the brothers, and just then a bird flies overhead. What kind of bird is that? It's a monkey-faced owl, dark bird with white undermarkings. And then the mate, we don't have anything like that in Indiana. So we watch, and then the mate flies in, and the two circle overhead. It's like an arm has reached out, sort of pulling us back from the abyss. And shortly after that, the soldiers leave, and we go back into the house, and I spend the night. But the next day, the mother, through an interpreter, the family was Jihad Islamic. And then, through an interpreter the next day...
The family that you were staying with?
Yeah, turns out. And I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't killed. But through an interpreter the next day, the mother says, a miracle happened last night. And she's thinking, well, nobody was killed, the house wasn't ransacked, nobody's taken off to jail. But my understanding of the miracle, I was clear too that a miracle had happened. But my understanding is that God worked a miracle in that I hadn't understood that God doesn't require us to have all the languages, all the skills, all the nonviolent tools at hand. God just wants us to be available. And if we're available, God works the miracle.
That is so good. That is
so
so
good.
Good.
That was my transforming moment in Gaza Strip.
Wow, really?
And what kind of a bat was it?
It was a monkey-faced owl.
It was an owl, and it was black and white.
It had a monkey's face?
Well, maybe so.
Kind of, a little bit, yeah. Okay, I just wanted to know. That's all.
Wow.
That is
and so that was your turning point of when you surrendered over to the Lord?
Well, for me it became clear that I can do some of this. I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to have all the languages in the world. I can be available. And so since 93, I've been working in the war zones of the world, trying to find ways to reduce the violence, to correct the injustices in those places. So I've become a world traveler, and it feels like I've been used by God in very special ways. So
have you as a result of you being in a war zone, have anyone come to the Lord or curious about, you as a Christian, especially over in the jihad area and things like that?
Not using a weapon, not knowing the language,
Well, let me share one story.
Okay.
At one point, we were working in the West Bank. We had started a project in Hebron in the West Bank. And at one point, some Palestinians came up to us and asked us, you know what the most important thing is that you have done here in Israel-Palestine? And my mind flashed, all the different dramatic things that we'd done there. And he said, no. The most important thing you've done here is to present a different picture of what Christian is in a society where Christian is the Holocaust for Jews, or where Christian is the Crusades for Palestinians. And I thought, wow, okay. Because we try to be peacemakers. I mean, that's our goal. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace, so as followers of the Prince of Peace, to be in those conflict zones and to be working, sometimes we ride the buses that the Israeli buses that have been attacked by suicide bombers, Palestinian suicide bombers, and people say, you can't do that, you're endangering your life. Well, it's a protest against suicide bombs as a way to resolve conflict. That doesn't resolve conflict. Or sometimes we're in front of the bulldozers that come to destroy Palestinian homes. And, you can't do that. Well, if it's not right, we need to be there saying what is right. And so, but they were saying the most important thing we did is present a different picture of what Christian is.
And Americans.
Wow.
And maybe Americans.
Yeah.
Well, we did that in Iraq. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true, yes.
Wow.
Wow, that is so good. That is really, really good.
Wow. So, and what about the other experiences?
Well, may I tell you a story from
Yes.
Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We had made a decision to send a team to Afghanistan. It was after the war had already started.
And this the Peacemaker team.
Christian Peacemaker teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I was supposed to be on that team going to Afghanistan. Well, we made a decision not to go there, but decided to go to a place where the war hadn't started yet, in Iraq. And so in the fall of 2002, a group of us from Christian Peacemaker teams and Voices in the Wilderness went to Iraq to try to see what would it take to stop a war for a change. I mean, could you stop a war? You know, you were telling me that the Pope has just been, like if the Pope had been in Baghdad, would that have stopped a war? If we had 500 grandpas and grandmas on the ground in Iraq from the United States, would that have stopped a war? What would it take? You know, try to imagine.
Interesting, yes.
Well, we didn't stop it. So we were in Baghdad when shock and awe came out of the sky. We were in a hotel right along the Tigris River. Not sure whether we were going to live through it. One of my teammates said we had about a 40% chance of coming out of it alive. So we had stashed water jugs and dried food, and at about 2 o'clock that morning, the morning of the 20th of March, it was the 20th of March there in Iraq already, we got a phone call that the missiles had been fired, the bombers were on their way. We had about 3 hours. So we gathered in a little first floor room. The windows had been boarded up, and it was scary. We prayed together. We read some scripture together. We sang a song. We shared some of the emotions that were on our heart then. It was about 5:32. The first explosion happened. Probably one of the palaces across the river, across the Tigris River from where we were staying in a small little hotel. And for the next 2 hours, it was like the gates of hell had opened up. And then everything stopped. So we went and set up a tent at a water treatment plant as a symbol of the vulnerability of civilians in a war zone. You know, a canvas doesn't stop even an M16 bullet, let alone a Tomahawk missile or a B-52 bomb. And as a protest against the earlier targeting of water treatment sites in the first Gulf War. Well, 10 days into the bombing, a missile took out our communications center. We had been one of the few international groups in Baghdad at that point, so media from all around the world were calling us 24 hours a day. And at that point, we lost our phone line with the world. We walked to a meeting we had to that morning because we couldn't call a taxi. And on the way there, we were at the corner. We could look back and see the communication tower that had been taken out by the missile. And so we asked a police officer, okay, if we check that out. He said, oh, sure, you're welcome. But there were other security people in Baghdad at that point that weren't quite as welcoming. So, in essence, finally, we were ordered out by the Iraqi Mukhabarat, the secret police. And we were 300 miles from the Jordanian border where we were headed. We found drivers to take us on that route. So as we headed out of town, out of Baghdad, you could see bridges that had been hit by missiles. You could see burnout chassis of pickup trucks and buses along the side of the road. Or at one point, the 3 eastbound lanes were just a crater where a bomb had hit. There were fighter jets in the air. You know, we were going through, that was where the war was going on. And we were traveling fast. We were 3 cars in a caravan.
How many people were with your group?
Well, we had probably about 50 of us in Baghdad at that point, but not all of us were ordered out. There were 8 of us ordered out, and some other people chose to go at that time because we didn't know if anybody was going to be able to get out after that. So 3 cars of us. And as we were passing the town of Rutba, which is about the only population center in the western desert, Anbar province, we passed a bus that was burned out in the right lane, and probably in the left lanes we picked up some shrapnel. And about 4 kilometers down the road, the left rear tire blew, and we were in the ditch. And we careened down the ditch, and at the end of the ditch there was this huge hole and crashed. We were 5 of us in the car were injured. Well, we were the trailing car, so the first 2 cars didn't look back for another 45 minutes. So there we were in the ditch, and we clambered out of the car, smelling gas and afraid it was going to blow up. And an Iraqi driver eastbound stopped and hollered across the median, "May I help you?" And remember, we had come in as peacemakers. We were going to be the good people. Well, he loaded us into his car, took us back into Rutba. And there in Rutba, they took us into a small first aid center. But this was after 13 years of sanctions, so there were no medical supplies, no painkillers, not much of anything. But they patched us up as well as they could. As we came in, they said, "It doesn't matter whether you're Iraqi or American, we'll take care of you. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or Christian, we'll take care of you." And then they were, I think, doing triage, sort of like, okay, if they're still alive, we'll take care of them. If it maybe looks like they're not going to live, then we'll get them later. Well, I was the last one they did. I split my head open and peeled back, and I was drenched in blood. I had my CPT cap clamped to my head to staunch the blood. And so no painkiller, no disinfectant, so they're just going to stitch it back together. And as they started to stitch it together, the doctor said, 3 days ago, a U.S. pilot bombed and destroyed the children's hospital here in Rutba. And at that point, it hit me. I'm the enemy, and yet
you're representing
those fighter jets in the sky. That's from the United States, and I'm from the United States, and yet I'm alive today because this doctor said, "Well, it's a human being. Let's take care of him." So there's a book that's come out, The Gospel of Rutba, and it tells that story. If any of you are interested in that, Greg Barrett is the author, and we went back about 2 years ago, and to meet the people who had taken care of us, and for Greg to learn more about that situation. Well, in the midst of that, I'm sitting on the table, they're sewing up my head. In the midst of that, I have an out-of-body experience. So I'm kind of up here at a distance, looking down, and God's asking, "Okay, Cliff, is this a good time to die? Would you like to stay around for a while?" And it's like, well, I've lived an amazing life. Just the experiences I've had, a loving family, a loving wife and children, and I wasn't in pain.
I was going to ask you that.
I wasn't in pain at that point.
Praise
It would have been a
God.
wonderful time to just say, "Well, okay, God, I'm ready." It would have been an easy way to die, and yet something said, "Well, maybe I'd like to hang around for a while, I guess." So I'm still here, I guess.
Yes.
Maybe God has some other purpose for me.
Wow.
And plus, you
that's
probably wanted to
awesome.
see your daughters grow up more.
That would have been nice.
Yeah,
yes.
so that's a good
So I came
thought.
back into my body, and they finished patching me up.
Wow. But I was going to ask you that about the pain. I wondered if God
They didn't give you
relieved some
any.
of that.
Painkiller.
Yeah,
They
no.
didn't have any.
Oh.
But it
Praise
wasn't.
God.
I
That
think there
is-
was enough trauma to my head that
But still,
pain went away.
yeah, I'm thankful to hear that. Oh my gosh, tell us more.
Well, may I tell you, probably one of the most dramatic stories I had took place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Okay.
Yes.
When we went into the Congo, the borders, we were going to come through Kenya and then Rwanda. So the borders between Rwanda and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, had been closed. And a rebel commander had been raiding from the north, had been invading military base and winning victories and taking town after town. And he was right on the outskirts of Goma, which was the place we were going to be based. So we called and asked the Martin Luther King group, which was the group that had invited us to come. We'd been there several times, just delegations, and they had asked if we would come to explore the possibility of putting a long-term team in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so we were there for 3 months. Well, they said, "Sure, you should just come ahead." So we came ahead, the border opened, and the rebel commander stopped just a few miles from where we were living inside of Goma. And the the war that's been happening in that Great Lakes region of Africa, but also mostly focused in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has killed probably, I think the number is about 6 million people, more than any other conflict the world has seen since the Second World War. And the actors of war, and they're like, at the point we went in, there were probably 9 different armed groups, nationalist group, groups from the people who had been killed in the massacres in Rwanda, people who had done the massacres in Rwanda, militia groups within the Congo, the Congolese military themselves, and each of them were doing terrible things, whether it was recruiting child soldiers or using rape as a tool of war.
And drugs to keep them drugged up.
And it's just horrendous. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. And I couldn't imagine. We visited refugee camps where hundreds of thousands of people would move constantly. You know, every time the war front moved, the local population would have to move for some sense of security. And every single aspect of society was controlled by people with guns. And it was like, how would you even start working at this? I mean, yes, I've had experiences with nonviolence in conflict zones, but this just overwhelmed me. And how could the people who live here even have any hope or any, you know, we talk about visions of peacemaking or the prophet's images of lion laying down with the lamb or anything like that. But here in the Congo, impossible. But there in the Congo, I experienced civil society, whether it's church leaders or community people. I experienced them taking back the initiative from the armed actors. And we talk about, I mean, this is in the season of Lent or leading up to Easter when resurrection happens, when life wins a dramatic victory over death. And I saw that there. Let me tell just a couple stories.
Oh, go ahead. You have time.
First, colleagues of Pastor Kuye. Luke Kuye was a pastor on the south shore of Lake Kivu, just on the other side of the lake from Goma, where we were. And he was approached by his colleagues in 1998. This was as the Civil War was going on in the Congo, asking him if he would be willing to coordinate a dialogue between the armed actors. He said, "I'm a preacher. I don't do politics." No way. And they twisted his arm, and he finally said, okay, I will. And so he did that process, and it was a successful one. They got the different groups to talk together. And then his colleagues came back to him. They said, we should start an interim government, and we need somebody with good expertise, and you're the person. He said, no, I don't do politics. I'm a preacher. I don't do politics. I said, you are the person. So he coordinated, led out on that, and did a tremendous job. And then some years or sometime after that, there was a peace conference that was starting in Pretoria, South Africa. And they asked if he would coordinate that process. And again, he resisted, but finally conceded after they twisted his arm. And it'll be a movie someday from Hollywood. The drama, sitting around a table, all the different armed actors, everybody knowing that the rebels wouldn't sign. And so he started the paper to sign around the other way. And lo and behold, when it got to them, they did sign.
Praise God.
But even if they did sign, who's to guarantee that the real leaders who were living in Europe at that time will really go along with it? Well, who's going to go talk to them? I mean, it's scary. Well, Kuye. Okay, and they agreed. But even if they do resettle in Rwanda, what's going to guarantee that this time there won't be another genocide, but this time in reverse? Hutus being killed by Tutsi. So who's going to do anything? Well, Kuye. So he went in, talked to the Council of Churches in Rwanda, and set up a welcoming space for those returning fighters and their families.
Wow.
Well, you understand that Kuye isn't the only one that did something, but he represents a church leadership that said, no longer is the future going to be shaped by those with guns. We're going to be responsible for shaping the future. And Jesus' commission to the people who are his followers are to take that kind of responsibility. That we are the ones who shape the future. We are the people who understand what the reign of God is all about. And we need to be living out those realities right now, here on earth, just as it is in heaven, just like our prayer. Well, there's another story. This is a little more difficult. Masika was a woman who lived on the west shore of Lake Kivu. She lived in a little village. Am I okay on time?
Oh, yeah.
And the fighters were fighting out just to the west of that little village. They came in, the rebel fighters came into her village. They came into her house. They killed her husband in front of her, and she and her 2 teenage daughters were gang raped by like a dozen of those rebel fighters. Well, Masika saw no reason to live. She was destroyed physically and psychologically. She just wanted to die, wanted life to be over. But somebody from Synergie des Femmes, a women's support network, found her, took her to a hospital where doctors began to put her back together physically. She was taken to a safe house.
That was the mother?
Yeah, Masika, the mother. She was taken to a safe house where she began to get psychological counseling to deal with the trauma. She was given skill training so that if she could go back to her community, she wouldn't be rejected as they would otherwise, because she was the potential engine for development for those communities that were economically devastated. And about that time, her daughters came to her. They had been given scholarships from Amnesty International, one to go on to school as a medical doctor, the other one as a social worker. They also both had babies from the rapes, and they came asking Masika if she would take care of those babies. She agreed
both of them got pregnant during that rape?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, that's the terror across the Congo, that just, because rape is a tool of war. To destroy the enemy, to destroy the family structure, to destroy the social structure, to just...
Seemed like it would.
Anyway, so Masika soon had 13 rape babies that she was caring for.
Oh my God.
But Masika was also working with Synergie des Femmes. She was crossing the battle lines that most people refused to cross because of the danger. She would make a tremendous Christian Peacemaker team person with that kind of daring. And but she was crossing those lines because she was committed that no more were people with guns going to shape the future. She had grandchildren, and she wanted to shape a future that was safe and secure for those grandchildren. She was committed. Her life didn't matter, but her energies were going to be going toward shaping a future no longer shaped by those who carried guns. And so here it was, I mean, in the Congo, where I least expected it, there I found in the most dramatic ways that the initiative had been taken away from those who carried guns and had been taken back by those from civil society, from the churches, from people working for peace. And it wasn't like they needed us. We could give them encouragement. We could say, wow, the stuff you're doing here is far better than anything we've ever seen anywhere around the world. And it's not like the struggle is over. The struggle will go on. But the struggle is in the hands of people like Nukuye and Masika, who understand how God works in this world and are willing to take the risks and take the steps that work to bring God's kingdom here.
And like Esther said, if I perish, I perish. They have that attitude.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you know, that's a
Exactly.
good relationship with God. When you get to that point, you know it's only better after that.
So let me ask you, Cliff, were you able to like minister the gospel of Jesus Christ to any of those places where, you know, the Lord opened up the door for you to go?
I think what we did in Palestine, and one time in Iraq, we had been asked by a Muslim group to train them as peacemakers. Well, you know, our training had been as Christian peacemakers, and they said, but we're not Christian, but we're Muslim, but we think peacemaking is an important part of who we are. And so we said, well, I don't know, but let's try. So we did a training. And we did a training, and at the end of the training, we said, okay, now what are your plans? How are you going to use this training? And we started by, when we train as, I should be a little more descriptive. When we train as a Christian peacemaker team, we ask, what are the spiritual undergirdings that carry us through the impossible situations that we'll face around our world? Mm-hmm. And what are the disciplines that are part of that spirituality? Whether it's prayer, whether it's fasting, whether it's pilgrimage, whether it's listening, whether it, what are the things that carry us? And so we ask them the same thing. What are the spiritual undergirdings that are going to carry you from your religious tradition in the conflicts that you're going to be working with? And so we did. It was an abbreviated training, but at the end of the training, we asked them, okay, now what are you going to do? And they said, well, we should take this training on across the rest of Iraq. And because there are other people who want that kind of training, that peacemaker training. And we should maybe send teams to Sudan, and maybe teams to the United States. And where they ended up, ended up going to Fallujah. Now, this was after the U.S. attack on Fallujah, and the U.S. military had put Shia police in Fallujah, which was a Sunni city. So there's the two different groups of Muslims.
Ooh.
And at first they said, no way, we'll never go there. They would just kill us because we're Shia. And somebody on the team said, well, but we never said that it was going to be easy to be peacemakers. Maybe we should reconsider. So they did, and they decided to go. They decided we'd go to start to rebuild Fallujah. And at first they made contact with a Sunni cleric, and the Sunni cleric was a bit skeptical, but he finally said, okay. And so they had to rebuild, you have to start by cleaning up. So at first they went there and had orange jackets on, and everybody was helping to clean up rubble. And at the end of the day, the Sunni cleric said, wow, this is absolutely fantastic. What we need to do is we'll put together a team of Shia and Sunni, and we'll go up to Kirkuk in the Kurdish north. So that's the third of the three groups that you often see divided in Iraq. And we'll help to clean up and rebuild in Kirkuk. And then we'll go all across this country and rebuild Iraq together. And that kind of reconciliation to me is the kind of thing that I see Jesus talking about as Jews and Gentiles are brought together in Jesus. And Jesus' gift of grace is that kind of reconciliation that comes. Now, they didn't become Christian, but we're still in touch with them. They were the ones who set up that meeting in Rutbah when we went back for the author to write the Gospel of Rutbah. Sammy is one of the translators who was on that team. He's been in our home, and I think what they've seen is the same thing that Palestinians saw, or that Israelis saw, a different picture of what Christian is in a country where Christian was, in this case, the occupier in Iraq. So I don't know how God's going to work that, but I think
yes, God, he
that's
works in strategic ways.
And I don't know God's mind, but I'm willing to be God's hands, and if God uses me in ways that bring God's kingdom,
and make them think.
Hallelujah.
Like when you guys told what things were deep coming from you to make peace, I was wondering what kind of things they had to say. They probably had to try to think a little bit, didn't they?
Well, they talked about their religious tradition that, Islam means peace. And so, and their relationship to God, to Allah, and if the Old Testament is right, that God is the God of both religions. Yeah. And so I think God works sometimes in mysterious ways that I won't claim to know all the
Yeah.
Right,
answers.
but it's
But
an
too, I've been
exciting,
hearing
yeah.
a lot of testimony of a lot of Jews and Muslims has been surrendering their life over to Jesus is the Messiah because he has been visiting them in dreams.
Or in different
yes,
feet,
I've been
hands and
yes,
faces.
I've been hearing a lot of Muslims been getting saved because the Lord been coming to them in the dream.
Yeah.
And they're waking up, surrendering their life over to Jesus as Christ and Lord.
And that's different.
And he is the
I mean,
God
they know
of
Jesus
Abraham,
as a prophet,
Isaac,
but
and Jacob.
He is also the one who saves
Right.
us.
Yes, yes.
What were you
yes,
saying about in their faces or in their eyes? And what were you saying about that? I missed it. I mean, I didn't get it.
That God works through our hands and through our lives, and they can see. I trust. I trust that they see Jesus in our hands and feet. Jesus said, "As you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me." So
Right.
hopefully, I've been doing that to Jesus. I'll let Jesus decide.
Yes,
Yes,
but
you
I know
just
what
showed
mean.
his love.
Yeah.
I think that's really
and
good.
prayerfully their hearts, would be pricked to
Yes.
yes,
And it takes those steps.
Yes, it
Because
does. Yes, it does.
otherwise, they don't have any transforming experience to move from. And so
Exactly.
hopefully,
Okay.
To
Wow,
both,
thank you
to
so
both
much.
religions, if you
Yeah,
want to say something.
yes, look into the camera, whatever the Lord put on your heart, encourage someone or pray or
maybe the most important thing is to recognize that our prayer that God's kingdom can come on this earth as in heaven requires our participation. And sometimes it's a risky task that we undertake, but Jesus never promised that there weren't going to be risks or costs in our discipleship. So I invite each of you who are listening, who are watching, to be one of those disciples that is willing to take the risks of peacemaking, of discipleship, of being a witness to God's light, of God's love, a witness to God's love in this world. Our world needs it.
Yes.
yes.
Thank you so much. What
Yes.
in spirit. Yes. Okay.
Wow. Thank you
It's
so much
exciting.
and for tuning in and God bless you.
Yeah.
Jericho tumbles to